This presentation is going to look at how the Nazis sought to establish firmer control of Germany after they were appointed to power in January of 1933. Because allegedly, in January 1933, the Nazis weren't in a particularly strong position. They only had 3 positions in the cabinet, and the conservative forces allegedly had hired the Nazis to do their bidding. So one of the ways that the Nazis established their control was through the use of force. I want to look at this a little bit more carefully. One of the first things they did is that Hermann Göring, a Nazi and a member of the cabinet, he issued a decree which made both the SA and the SS, and that he made them into auxiliary police. Both the SA and the SS were essentially paramilitary forces under Nazi control and leadership. 17th of February 1933, they get permission to work with the Gestapo, and the 22nd of February, they are officially named to be auxiliary police. What this means is that gentlemen like this guy in this picture can go and they can lock up people, and they can do this in various makeshift prisons which appear all over Germany, so in basements and town halls and warehouses and that sort of thing. So it was a very, very haphazard system, but it was used with really quite significant force against the enemies of the Nazis, in particular the socialists and the communists, and so they could be arrested and they could be locked up. At the end of February 1933, there was the Reichstag fire and the subsequent passage of the Reichstag fire decree, also known as the Law for Protection of People and State, which further suppressed civil liberties and made it easier to arrest people and incarcerate them. So many people were incarcerated so quickly that the Nazis had to set up special concentration camps, and the first of these opened at Dachau in March of 1933, and the political enemies of the Nazis were locked up here. The 23rd of March 1933 saw the passage of the enabling law. So not only are the Nazis locking up their opposition, but at the same time they're trying to consolidate their control of the parliament, the Reichstag. And then what the enabling law does is it alters the constitution so that the chancellor, who is Adolf Hitler, can issue decrees and have them become law without having to first pass them through the Reichstag. Now this passed in part because the 81 communist representatives who'd been elected the previous November weren't able to attend. They'd either been arrested, they'd been driven into hiding, or physically prevented from attending the sitting of the Reichstag where this was passed. But after March of 1933, one could argue that Germany no longer was a democracy and had become a dictatorship under the Nazis. There are still many potential political opponents, however. One of these were the trade unions, who had quite a strong influence. What the Nazis did in their typical fashion is on the 1st of May 1933 they allowed the trade unions to celebrate May Day, but then on the 2nd of May 1933 they raided the trade union offices. In doing so they arrested the leadership, seized funds, and other documentation. They replaced the leadership of the trade unions with the German Labor Front under Robert Ley, who was a committed Nazi. Effectively what this did is this takes the trade unions and decapitates them, takes away their leadership, and replaces them with a group loyal to the Nazis. As a result of this, the trade unions themselves are defanged and now become more an instrument by which the Nazis can propagandize and control the workers than as a source of opposition. There was also concern about dissent from within. The SA, though serving a very, very important role in political violence in support of the Nazis, was also becoming a bit of concern. By 1934, the leader of the SA, a man named Ernst Röhm, was saying that the SA would be a better frontline military force than the German army. At the same time, there were divisions within the Nazi party. There was a more socialist wing which wanted a second revolution, and the SA seemed to be coming around to the support of this. Hitler at the same time believed that he needed to retain the support of both the German army and traditional German conservatives, and because the conservatives and the SA were coming into increasing risk of conflict with each other, Hitler had to make a decision. What he decided to do is he took the SS, which up to this time had been a subordinate organization within the SA, he took the SS and he gave them separate police powers. And in this picture right here, you see the Interior Minister Hermann Göring shaking hands with Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the SS. And in this picture is allegedly the ceremony where this took place. Göring is giving special powers to the SS to take on security services. A couple months later, the night of 29 to 30 June 1934, the SS, with the assistance of the regular army, attacked the SA leadership at a conference. They arrested them, and they executed them. In the process of this purge, men like Ernst Röhm, the leader of the SA, were assassinated. Many other potential enemies of the Nazis were also purged. For example, former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher was shot, as was his wife, who had the misfortune to come downstairs to see what the noise was, and so she was shot in the process. The Nazis also killed Gustav von Kahr, who you might remember was the Bavarian official who thwarted the Nazis' unsuccessful beer hall putsch, their attempt at revolution, way back in 1923. The Nazis had a long memory, and 10 years later they found Gustav von Kahr and they shot him. Hitler was able to portray the Night of Long Knives, these purges, as an attempt to consolidate control, not because he was after power, but because he was protecting the German people, that there was a crisis and he needed to take strong action in order to protect the German state and the German people. And he was able to pass this off and was able to portray himself as an effective and dynamic leader. So what else do we do beyond this? Well, the Nazis set up a whole system of special courts which were to deal with political crimes. The traditional courts had problems, like they were too concerned about legal procedure or civil liberties. And these new courts, with the so-called People's Court at its apex, were designed to deal with political criminals. So in other words, if you're a socialist, if you're communist, and you said something critical of the Nazi government, you could be arrested and you could be locked up as a result of one of these courts. Now the thing is, it wasn't just these special Nazi courts. The regular court system got on board very quickly as well. And in fact, part of the reason the new courts were set up is because the regular courts just simply couldn't churn through the volume of people that were required to be dealt with under the Nazis. So the political courts also got involved, and we see this expressed in many ways. For example, the number of death penalties in Germany increases from 64 in 1933 all the way up to 117 in 1938, so you're looking at almost doubling. In a similar way, the number of people incarcerated in regular prisons in Germany on any given day in 1927 were 69,000 per year. In 1937, you have on average on any given day 122,000 people in prison. So in other words, we see a new Nazi court system set up to deal with political criminals, but we also see the regular courts getting involved and not only finding more people guilty and incarcerating them at higher rates, but also incarcerating them and punishing them more severely for more significant crimes. So instead of going for manslaughter, prosecutors are increasingly going for crimes such as murder. And then finally we have concentration camps. I like this picture of Dachau, because this is a picture of people leaving Dachau. And this is what happened in the concentration camps quite often, especially in the early 1930s. People went in, they stayed, and then they were released. And the hope was they'd have such an unpleasant time that they wouldn't offer any more resistance to the Nazis. However, the Nazis were very effective in what they did, and by the mid-1930s, in fact, they dealt with a lot of their political enemies and either driven them into hiding or driven them overseas. So what does this then mean? Well, the population in the camps actually goes down from something like 45,000 people held in the camps. There was a whole system of camps by the mid-1930s. Something like 45,000 people held in 1933 goes down to about 7,500 by 1936. However, they still had these camps. Some were closed, but the rest were then deployed for another purpose. From February 1936 onwards, Hitler ordered a reorientation of the purpose of the camps. So rather than being used for political enemies, they were instead used for social enemies. So alcoholics, habitual criminals, the unemployed, homosexuals, Jews. Anyone who is deemed to be asocial or racially degenerate would become a target and would be locked up in these camps. The treatment in these camps became increasingly harsh, even as the population went back up again. The treatment of prisoners and the number of deaths in the camps goes up even faster than the increase in population. So, for example, in 1936, there were 10 people killed at Dachau, but in 1938, there are 370 people killed in Dachau. Now, the population of the camps did admittedly go up, but it didn't go up as fast as the murders. So by the late 1930s, the population of the camps has risen from a low of about 7,500 up to nearly 21,000 people.